Hi everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Weekly Pulse from Project Flux. And we're delighted to have back Yoshi, who's back from his holidays. How was it, Yoshi?
It was good. I got to experience what the sun is truly like again. And not having it in the UK, going to Spain, and it was hot. And I was out there with the Euros. At one point on, I was supporting the England team. My missus had my England, so I didn't want to wear it in case she's not. And then when Spain won, I was shouting, "Vamos, vamos, vamos!"
Oh, see, that's just been...
I joined in with the celebration.
Yeah, well, good for you. Well, look, at least you had some summer because we've had very, very little here. But I've got to wait a few more weeks for my little break, but I'm looking forward to it very much. In your absence, we luckily had Dave to fill in for you, and he did a great job in helping, and we had a good interview with him as part of the Spotlight series that we do. So if anyone who hasn't heard that yet, please go and check those out. But yeah, it's great to have you back, Yoshi. And I'm not sure if you were keeping tabs on what was going on in the whole AI world, but it hasn't stopped just because you're on holiday. That's all I can tell you.
Yeah, and that's what surprised me. I thought it would stop. No, it didn't. I mean, there's some of the developments this week, I would say, not huge changes to any big models, but I think there's kind of things that are bubbling under the surface, which is causing a lot of tension across the tech, in
Yeah.
politics, etc., etc. So it's good to get stuck in.
Yeah. Well, that's when you know things are getting real, when it's all becoming sort of front page news.
Mm.
And there's European Union and what have you, which we're going to talk about, and governments getting involved in the legislation. So we've had the King's Speech, we've had the EU Act, we've had various announcements from OpenAI, which we'll cover today. But before that, and we didn't cover this in the newsletter, but it was quite a big shock that happened with the whole IT outage that happened. I can't remember which day it was. Was that Thursday or Friday? The week
Friday.
just gone, Friday, which was, whilst not directly AI related, I think we should just quickly chat about it because it went to show for me how fragile this is. And whilst, luckily there wasn't anything, not a major incident, although the people who had to sort of stop their operations or stop their holidays will be saying that it was pretty significant. But, you could easily see now how a few lines of codes can absolutely throw everything up in the air, can't you?
Yeah, and it shows you how important having standards and frameworks in place for when you develop and you deploy
Yeah.
patches and updates, how important it is to follow process. Because like you said, that this one small kind of deployment of this code caused a catastrophe. I mean, I missed it, but I know that it impacted a lot of different software. And Microsoft were kind of one of the big hitters, right? That got hit quite largely. I think we were okay within Glees, but I think there were some people who couldn't even access their laptop.
Yeah. I think, some people made the right choice of not allowing automatic updates, which kept them safe. I was feeling pretty smug as a Mac user that it didn't impact Mac users. But, a huge proportion of the world's IT system, and it goes to show how globally connected we all are. So I suppose my question is, if this can happen to the major sort of software providers and the major infrastructure providers like Microsoft, what happens, right, if we do get to, let's say we get to AGI, or we get close to AGI, where we have that kind of, what we were talking about last week with the different stages of AI, and we're up to that kind of autonomous agent stage where AI are conducting tasks and they're making decisions on behalf of organizations. And then something like this happens where there's a bug where we think just you get the blue screen of death. What happens then?
It's like you think there'd be like in those old films you used to get with like a reset button in the robots, and you try and reach it and you hit it and it resets itself. But I don't know, because it's such a convoluted field, and the way that kind of big tech players and governments and different organizations have set up their infrastructure with AI and also their IT systems, it's quite a hard fix. It's not kind of a one fixes all, one solution fixes all sort of thing. So I think there's a lot of convolution to it. Yeah, and it's a scary point, a single point of failure, really, isn't it? It shows you how connected we are, like you said. But just kind of reiterating that point, we look at it in terms of consumers, but when you look at it in certain industries like healthcare or finance, right, and some of these industries, it would have had really detrimental impacts,
Yeah.
And if you kind of get in this roam-like behavior of malevolent AI in the future, like you mentioned, when we hit AGI, that's going to be an order of magnitude or even more, a lot worse.
Yeah, no, it has had major. I think you've got people's holidays cancelled, you've got operations and backlogs that are going to get longer and longer. So it has had an impact, and I think it's just one we've got to watch out for. And in a sense, I'd say kind of lucky escape, and hopefully it will get people's thinking. It's like you said about providing some frameworks and some disaster recovery kind of steps to make sure that this doesn't happen again. But we should definitely take notice of it. And any organisations listening, you need to see just how quickly this incident sort of unravelled. So lucky escape, I'd say. But moving on to the newsletter. So we published the newsletter. Would it be Monday morning? Anyone who doesn't subscribe, please subscribe to the newsletter. Links in the show notes, as we always say, and you get basically we do all the dirty work for you. We go through all the news around what's happened in AI in the week, and we condense it down to a nice quick email for you. So do get that. But the main story, Yoshi, do you just want to describe the one that we've led on this week?
Yeah, so we've focused on the new UK government's approach and strategy for AI. So within the last few months or years or so, we had the Tory government, and I would say they did seemingly well to kind of place in the UK at the centre of a lot of AI developments, on an international or global scale. And now their approach was kind of the pro-innovation approach, right? They kind of released the shackles, and you could innovate at a very extreme level, right?
Yeah.
So you'd see a lot of progression, but it does start to shine a light on some of the risks, like we've just touched on recently. You can have kind of loopholes or things, not loopholes, kind of cracks that start to show if you don't have good governance or regulation in place. So now with the Labour coming into power within the UK government, their approach is a bit more stringent. They're kind of more proactive in terms of their governance, and they're more closely tied to the approach that the EU is adopting, which is kind of a lot more extreme in terms of its governance, and trying to strike that balance between innovation but also developing safely and ethically is a balance which can be quite difficult to attain because you have different vested interests, right? You have big tech who want to innovate, and they want to do that because, like you said, there's an arms race. There's a kind of a race to who can develop the most advanced AI models. But there's also the idea is that we have to regulate this, that we don't want to create risk or fear or kind of compromise our safety. So getting that balance is key. But whether or not Labour are approaching it in the right way is something that we'd have to discuss now.
Yeah. Well, I think it is. It's like walking a tightrope between going fast enough that you're not being left behind, but at the same time putting it together all the safeguards that you rightly need to. And I think it's quite interesting because this has come out of the King's speech. So for those who are listening from places outside of the UK, the King's speech is basically iterates what the new government is going to be working on, and it didn't say too much about AI. I think there was one sentence: we're going to seek to establish the appropriate legislation to place requirements on those working to develop the most powerful artificial intelligence models. That was all it said in the King's speech. But the fact that the first main word there is appropriate legislation, I think rings true to what you said. It's going to be whilst they want to be proactive, it's going to be very much around doing it in a safe, sustainable manner. And like you say, Labour will naturally sort of lean towards the EU a bit more than the Conservatives did.
Yeah.
But the EU, and there's also the EU Act, which we can touch on shortly, and the links to all these things are in the show notes. But the EU Act has caused quite a lot of concern amongst some of the big tech. So, for instance, Meta have said that they're just not going to release their models in the EU. So we're creating this dichotomy between different places in the earth of some places that will just not be given access to certain AI models. Is that the answer? I'm not sure that is the answer.
Yeah, and with the King's speech, there was kind of two perceptions when that happened. And one was that, okay, it did showcase their commitment to, implementing some of these binding regulations on AI development. I think so that's a good thing if you look at it that way. But the other thing where they might have disappointed was that they didn't really act on making some of those, back when they were doing the Seoul Summit. And Rishi Sunak went over there recently, there were 27 countries committing to working together on the thresholds for kind of, severe AI risks. And there were 16 big leading AI companies, Apple, IBM, Meta, some of the others across the globe. And they had these voluntary safety commitments.
Yeah.
One thing that people were expecting from the King's speech was, okay, are we now going to make these voluntary commitments on a more statutory footing, or are we going to start to mandate this?
Yeah.
That's what we didn't see. And I think that's where there's this kind of a split in perception of how serious Labour are taking regulation.
I think they're just trying to play the right, because they can see the reaction to the EU Act, right? So, and they know that has actually it's stifling innovation in a way, because you just got tech companies pulling out of the region. So I think they're in a difficult position to get this right. And it's one just to keep our eye on. I mean, what do you think about what Meta have done? I mean, can you understand it? Is it a little bit childish in terms of, well, we're just taking our toy and we're going away, we're not going to let you play with our toy?
I think the issue is implementing regulation in an instance where we don't really know what the trajectory is. There's a lot of uncertainty. And I think what Meta don't like is that there's too much fluctuation or risk associated with how the EU are making that regulation happen. They could be yo-yo and they're not too sure. And because of that level of uncertainty, I think that's why they don't want to commit and deploy their model within the EU, because it can come to bite them back. So for instance, I think I was just looking here before, and the issue was how I can using. Yeah. So the issue wasn't specifically with the AI Act, which is supposed to come out in August, right? It was rather how it can train models using data from European customers while complying with GDPR and the EU's existing data protection law. So Meta announced that they were going to start training their AI models on users' data, right? So everyone got the notification and had to opt out. Okay, and they said that the EU regulators came back with loads of different, at the time they said it was fine, and then miles down the line they came up with loads of different questions. And that retrospective action having to fix all of that as a big tech company is what they want to avoid. And I think that turbulence is what kind of puts them off from deploying models in the EU, because they're subject to so much.
I mean, you can understand that. But the funny thing about it is Meta's got the open source model. In some sense, they're the good guys in this, and they're the ones being penalised, whereas it feels like the Googles and the Microsofts they'll probably pay lip service to it a little bit. So it's going to be interesting, and let's just see where that goes. The AI Act is meant to come into force. Is it for 1st of August?
I think it's 1st of August. But another big thing in there that they mentioned. Okay, so Labour's approach is different from, and we kind of put this in the newsletter itself, and we look at how we compare the EU with Labour's developments, or kind of their approach. And it specifically mentions that Labour are going to be targeting a handful of companies developing the most powerful AI models, which means it's not going to be a blanket case in terms of how they regulate AI, but they're going to focus on the most powerful AI models. So you're thinking ChatGPT or GPT-4 Omni, Claude Sonnet, etc., etc. The question that I have is how are they going to determine what is the most powerful AI model?
Yeah, I know. Right? Powerful, as we'll talk about in a minute when we talk about some of these new models, you've got the GPT Mini. So sometimes they're getting less powerful but more efficient. So where does that leave you? So I think it's one we just got to keep our eye on. And, it's the start of the term for the Labour government. So, time will tell, as they say. But of course, for those on the other side of the pond, we've also got a potential change of government in the US as well, and it'll be interesting and that looks like going the other way, from a more kind of liberal to a more conservative government, and it'll be interesting to see what happens there. Are they going to be a bit more bullish about it? So
because currently they're a bit more, and within the US they're a bit more federated in terms of how they govern AI, whereas within the EU, in China it's a lot more centralized. So I think there's going to be that difference, but I think this is why a lot of the big tech companies prefer that, right? It's because they're able to navigate regulations within it's not sector agnostic, is that there's specific regulations for specific sectors, and it's easy to navigate because you get more kind of specializations.
Yeah, absolutely. The thing about AI though is it's kind of it makes me laugh because it's irrelevant in a way, because we're talking about a global thing here, and unless you get everyone going at it together in the same way around these regulations, it's not going to make a lot of difference, because the EU says they want to do things in a certain way, but if America are going to go and do it anyway in the way that they want to do it, then that's not going to stop the advancement of AGI in potentially unethical or dangerous way. So the Seoul Summit was the right kind of way that we talked about at the time, trying to bring everyone together, but we know how difficult that is when we talk about global politics, because AI is right there now as a hot potato, key topic in global politics, and unfortunately I think it might end up being used as a bit of a rugby ball just to score points. So let's see. That's all we can do.
But what I would say quickly though, James, with that is, I don't want to say that Labour aren't, then they're not still going to be encouraging development within AI. So we do know that within terms of planning permissions for building data centers, that's made a lot more easier.
Yeah.
So now those sort of projects are classified as nationally significant infrastructure projects.
Yeah.
And what that basically means is that the government are able to make the decisions on the planning and not just local council. So there's this planning inspectorate which can make those decisions. So they are looking to streamline the development of AI infrastructure, which we touched on a few weeks ago.
Yeah. I mean, they're not just going to turn it all off. They're just going to take a slightly more cautious approach, is my guess. Yeah. Moving on then, there was a few articles in there around, it was an interesting one about BuildDots, right? We've covered BuildDots a few times. For those who don't know, they're an AI-driven construction tech firm that basically monitors progress on site using 3D cameras and various other trackers. Really interesting company. But what's interesting, the thing we wanted to highlight in the newsletter this week was around the fact that they've now secured another round of significant investment from another top tier capital venture firm. So this isn't slowing down. The money's still pouring into this sector, and they're trying to enhance the platform that they've built, and it's all around real-time data, automation, cost efficiency, using AI to automate roles and jobs and what have you. So this is just another step in that direction of these third-party companies coming in, attracting a huge amount of investment to effectively tread on the toes of what I would class as traditional workflows. So, and this happened as well. Also, there was a story this morning that didn't make the newsletter because it's just come out. We'll hopefully cover it next week around Knight Frank teaming up with a tech company to automate a lot of their roles. Now, my worry with all of this, this is not at all in any way, shape or form a problem with BuildDots or any other third-party platform. They're doing a fantastic job. But my worry about it is that there's companies going in and taking on these tech solutions without fully thinking through the consequences of their actions. So say, for instance, yes, we're going to implement BuildDots, whoever it may be, this new solution on my business or my project, and it automates X amount of processes. But what do you then do? What do you do with the people whose jobs or whose processes have been automated? And what happens if you want to turn back? There's no kind of rewind. Once you're gone down that route, you've walked into it, it's very hard to come back. So whilst on the one hand, I am all for this, I'm all for digital transformation, and that's what we both do, right? And AI is a key part of that. On the other hand, I am worried that the race to get things done as quickly as possible without fully understanding the implications of it are a concern to me.
Yeah, no, I would agree, especially because we know that data is extremely valuable. So a lot of these companies are going to be hoovering up all your data. So you have to be aware of who you're sharing it with, and that's the biggest thing at the moment as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And it's not like these companies are going in doing things in an unethical way. I think and they would argue, well, they're investing the money there, they're investing their time and money and resources in developing these solutions. So why shouldn't they benefit? And that's absolutely true. And that's that's capitalism in a way. That will happen. But as we've talked about it a few times. We've seen other industries go through that process where it's too late, and you try and sort of turn it back, and you can't. Once these companies have sort of changed the way that you deliver these processes, there's very, very little going back. So it's, again, going back to what we were talking about with the King's Speech and the EU Act. It's all around doing things, proceeding with caution. But what do you think about the fact that they're getting this significant, they continue to get this significant investment?
So they've grown very rapidly over the last few years, BuildDots, and it seems like they're expanding kind of the use cases or the scale of what they deliver and who they deliver to.
Yeah.
So I didn't know before they had a project management platform that incorporate that into this as well. And one thing I would notice that I mentioned even is I was looking at the top 50 fastest growing AI companies, and that was kind of ranked by 5-year search growth. So within the internet, who's getting the most searches in terms of AI-based companies? And you typically think as a consumer, you're thinking ChatGPT, you're thinking Perplexity, you might be thinking about Anthropic. They weren't in the top three, right? And what I found was the top three was a company called Luxonis, who had a 9,800% increase in search growth. RoboFlow, 9,700% search growth, and Edge Impulse, 9,500% search growth. Now, two of these companies are in computer vision, right? The same specific niche that BuildDots are in. So we're starting to see a lot more adoption of computer vision-based technologies within AI development. And to put in some context, OpenAI the last 5 years had a search growth of 5,800. So we're looking at almost double. Let's say 9,200% growth. So I'm not surprised that they've managed to secure such funding, because that seems to be the trajectory of a lot of investment into AI. Seems to be computer vision, but also edge AI technologies.
It's interesting, the computer vision point, because if you remember last year, it was sort of tail end of last year, Gartner released their hype cycle but for AI. And what it showed was you get to the Gen AI was the peak of the hype cycle, and then it kind of tails down to the trough of disillusionment. But it was computer vision, which was the thing that turned it back. So I think what we're seeing here is a glimpse into the future. Computer vision, it's still quite immature, but it's definitely getting better and better all the time. And it's not going to be long before that's the next big thing.
And it's that further into multimodal AI technologies as well. Like it's just a step closer to that. You're bringing in that visual aspect.
Well, the thing is, right?
So I'm not surprised by it.
You combine. The thing is, you got to look at these things. They don't all stand in a silo. So you've got your Gen AI, you've got your computer vision, and then you got your robotics. Now, where the natural, you put those three things together, you've got very, very able robotic workers who are able to combine those three things, and that's inevitably where we're going to get to. It gets quite scary.
But this is, and when you say that, because I remember earlier on in this call, you said that we're at a position whereby when we get to AGI, we're looking at where we can start to use AI technologies to run autonomously, so we can automate things.
Well, that's stage 3, isn't it, of the AI of OpenAI's route to AGI cycle.
Yeah, and we're saying we're comparing that with augmentation. So augmentation is more focused on people not actually getting displaced from their jobs, right? But we're actually looking at the more autonomous aspect where AI is only working independently. That then links to, I think it was recent developments within OpenAI that they had a secret AI model being built called Strawberry, formerly known as Q.
Yeah. Is that 5?
Maybe. So what they've actually alluded to in terms of how Strawberry is different to other AI models is that it should be able to think and research a bit more like a human. So at the moment you go on ChatGPT, you go through these different AI models and you ask it to conduct some research for you and it gives you an output. This next new step will be that the AI model will be conducting its own research autonomously without giving that prompt.
Well, that's stage 2 of the cycle that we talked about last week, isn't it? It's the reasoning, the ability to do kind of PhD level reasoning.
Yeah, and what they kind of determine it as is it will enable the model to do deep research. So that's basically allowing it to train and learn in terms of how they can develop itself autonomously as opposed to having human intervention.
Yeah. So there's a bit about that in the newsletter, and there was a Twitter or X, whatever we call it, talking about the Strawberry project, formerly known as Q, which people think, saying a different source had briefed this person. This said OpenAI had tested the AI internally, and it scored over 90% on a math data set, which is a benchmark of championship math problems. So this is the kind of level we're talking about. And if this is GPT-5, and if it is going to be released by the end of the year, this is the pace of change we're talking about. That by the end of this year, we may have a model that is at that kind of level.
You know what I find strange, though, is why do they keep naming these things after fruit? I mean, since Apple have come in, they've got Strawberry.
Why not? Why not? It's as good as anything. Is that their code name or someone else's? Who knows?
I don't know, because they changed the name. And with a lot of these models, some of the listeners here, you can go on a website, I think I mentioned before, called LMSys.
Yeah.
And you can try different models where companies deploy their AI models into this website and you can trial them, but they all sometimes give them code names. So you don't actually know when you're trying out these different AI models. So with LM6, GPT-4 Omni was out on there and you could test it. Before it was publicly available. It was just called, I think it was like GPT-2.
Did they call it GPT-2?
GPT-2.
It's really to confuse everyone.
Yeah, so they use these code names. So if you just check out LM6, you can always find the latest models. I'm sure the GPT-4 Omni Mini one was on there as well, which looks also performed quite well.
Yeah, well, I suppose they have to do that. They've got to test, in an unbiased way how these things are performing. So anyone who fancies doing that, we'll put the link to that site in the show notes. But OpenAI have been quite busy. There's a couple of other news stories from OpenAI. The first one was they released a few relatively mundane enterprise updates, which all about security, data security, all good stuff. But they also released something called the GPT-4o Mini. And this goes back to what we talked about with the Apple solution, what we were calling small language models, this kind of trend towards, whilst we're building, a lot of companies are going for the biggest, most powerful model they can produce. There's also a lot of companies trying to build more affordable, smarter models that are a bit more cost efficient. They're going at this from two strands, aren't they?
Yeah, and kind of what I mentioned what I saw on OpenAI's, I think, press release is they're saying that GPT-4 Omni Mini, which is quite a mouthful to say now, is an order of magnitude more affordable than previous frontier models, and now more than 60% cheaper than GPT 3.5 Turbo. So not only is it more efficient, like you said, it's cheaper, and I think. And this is why I think AI is starting to take off a lot more. There's a lot more adoption, is because it's now easier and cheaper to actually build and start using AI as a consumer. And that's what's different, like we mentioned a few weeks ago, different to the last few kind of hype cycles within AI development.
Yeah, and it's better for the environment, all the worries about carbon data centers, etc. This kind of addresses at least some of that. So I think what's going to happen is, whilst the powerful main model keeps going up, there'll always be this kind of more efficient, smaller model being built alongside it. So, let's say, for instance, by the time they release GPT-5, you'll probably have a GPT-4o smaller model, which is as powerful as the first version of GPT-5, and it will always be playing catch up. So this gives me some hope that there is, and it's already kind of proving that point that we talked about many months ago around that. Whilst there is clearly a massive concern about the amount of carbon and data centers that are needed to power these models, the hope is that the models themselves will come up with solutions to make themselves more efficient. And I think that's what we're starting to see happening.
Yeah.
Cool. So just the last story I wanted to talk about was, and it's early days yet, but Microsoft are talking about a spreadsheet large language model. So whilst we already can use Copilot within Excel and we can use data analysis within ChatGPT, it's pretty good. I think what they're talking about here is that Microsoft are looking at another level of really being able to use Excel and spreadsheets in the same way that you use, ChatGPT or other kind of word generated large language models. Early days yet, it's just rumors. But do you think this is anything different, or is this just more of the same of what we've seen?
I think when you first look at it, it looks quite similar to ChatGPT, in terms of using text inputs to analyze your data. What I think will be the next level up is kind of what it mentions in the key features. So it's mentioning automated analysis, right? So an LLM can automatically detect patterns, suggest formulas, and generate visualizations. So without you having to, let's say you want to look at the causality between two variables, right? I don't know, like the sun on people's choices to buy ice cream, right? The higher sun goes, more likely to buy ice cream. And you want to run a correlation or like a regression on that to see the causality of those two different things. Rather than you having to understand what regression analysis is or what some of these kind of what inferential statistics are, it can suggest it for you. Do you know what I mean? It can do that thinking for you, and then it can run it for you and say, this is relevant because, and you can trust this output because, and that's the level of insight I think that it needs when it says users can derive insights without deep technical knowledge. I think it has to be that step, that it makes it so much easier for people to understand that the insights they're getting from their data is valid, reliable, and is up the Gartner chart. It's in the predictive and prescriptive phase.
Are we getting close to that point where you can, let's say from a surveyor's point of view or a project manager's point of view, they get a bunch of tender returns in on whatever job, whether it's a construction job or an IT project, you get a bunch of tender returns in. Are we getting close to the point with this and probably the advent of Strawberry or GPT-5 or whatever you call it combined, where you're just going to be able to upload those tender returns in whatever format and the thing will spew back reasoned recommendations?
Yes, and it should recommend reasons or insights which you haven't thought of. That makes sense.
Wow. Yeah. So this is the difference now, because I think at the moment people use these models, but they still think they're in control, or they still think that, we still get this point, people saying you must have a human in the loop because the human will always be slightly better. How long is, and this is, I'm purposely being sort of devil's advocate with it, but how long will that be true? Because if GPT-5 or Strawberry is PhD level reasoning, which is the rumor, then surely PhD is going to be smarter than 99% of the people on the planet, right? I don't know what percentage it is have got PhD, but it's going to be pretty small, right? So at that point, that whole analogy or that whole story changes from saying you've got to have a human in the loop to you start saying, well, if there's a bunch of humans, you really need an AI in the loop to check what they're doing.
Yeah, and this is what I kind of like, because people want to upskill with AI, right, and data analytics, but there's kind of because things are changing so quickly, it's kind of a risky game. And I just give you an example. So people are expecting jobs which involve prompt engineering, so how you can ask AI model questions as a key skill for some career prospects, right, and opportunities. How you can get the best advice out of ChatGPT and other AI technologies. However, if developments like Strawberry are going to be conducting research autonomously and asking its own questions, right, and giving you insights, your ability to provide a good question might already be done better by the AI itself.
Yeah.
So it kind of makes the prompt engineering aspect a bit redundant, but I don't know how that interplay will kind of carry out.
The job of a prompt engineer might have been the shortest lived job ever in the existence of humanity. Who knows?
Yeah, this is what I mean. So so it's difficult now to try and find. We're always trying to find places to put ourselves.
Yeah.
Aren't we?
Yeah, exactly.
As humans into this, and now we're kind of running out of ideas.
Yeah.
That's one thing to reflect on.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, there's a lot to reflect on this week, as we keep saying, and there's plenty more where that came from. I mean, that's pretty much all we got time for today. But there's lots of other stories in the newsletter, so please log on to that, have a look around. So. Listen, Yoshi, always a pleasure to talk to you. We've unpacked quite a lot there. And anyone's got any comments or any suggestions, please drop us a line. We're always all ears to hear suggestions about how we can improve this podcast for the listeners, because after all, that's why we do it, to make sure that people feel informed. But also, if you can, please leave a review on your chosen podcast medium, whether that's Apple or Spotify. It really, really helps us. But on that note, I think we'll say goodbye, get back to the grind, as they say. But we'll see everyone next week. Thanks a lot, Yoshi. Good to have you back.